Okay, we are live. Hey folks, how are you all doing? I think so. All you are doing fine. Yeah, just wait for 1 to 2 minutes so that we can see the comments. I think so. Yep.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. You are so much senior from me, but I already very inspired from you, your work, and I trying to do the same as a community. So yeah, uh,
I
folks are
appreciate
joining.
that.
Yep.
I feel like people think I'm much older than I really am, but you know.
You're looking so much like a fit. I can say on that. Yeah, like you're working on your you're physically fit. I can because
I don't know
we develop
about that.
because we developers are sitting on the laptop and working on that stuff, and many people are, oh yeah, they are so much like athletic.
Yeah,
But
especially in the
yeah,
last year.
yeah, okay. So I think the six. Okay. People are joining. Please, folks, if you want, please share this YouTube link so that everyone get interacted on the point of why community is really important, and this whole podcast will be seamlessly good. I got to know it on that end. So yeah, first of all, you can say in India for teacher we said Guruji. You're like Guruji for me as a community leader. You can say so about John. John is a co-founder of Major League Hacking, the world's global community, world's top you can say community that I really inspired, and I started my own local community built on that. That is developer student community. So John previously worked as a developer evangelist, or you can say developer evangelism for at Twilio and Econest. Also, he's a national director for the startup buzz and co-creator for the Hackathon John Union. So that's a totally wrap up. But the main thing is he worked on the education sector so much, like he got Forbes 13 under 13 for education in Stonebrook University and 14 under 40 for entrepreneurship. Yeah, so people are showing, I think so. Yeah, fire. Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah. So now I am coming for the main topic, how to create and empower communities in town area. But for going in depth of everything, John, what do you think, according to you, what is community and why it is needed right now?
Yeah. So thank you for the introduction. I feel like it sounds way more impressive than it feels, but you know, I think that communities are really important because they are a way of bringing together like-minded people. And you know, when I think back to like how I got started in tech, community was like the driving force for it. Like I actually got my college degree in history, and my intention was to become a school teacher. And I had always like been interested in programming and really loved technology, but the coursework was not my favorite thing. And the part of it that really got me to actually work in the tech industry was that a friend invited me to like a bunch of meetups and hackathons, and I'd never heard of those before. I didn't know that they existed, but going to those events allowed me to meet all of these really smart, interesting people that inspired me to keep going. And I've seen other people do the same thing, right? And it's a way of making you feel like welcome and included and excited about your work. And it's hard to get that without other people that share that same interest.
Yep. So now my question, you can just you can seamlessly on the you can say why you think recently community culture, specifically in the world, increases. I know it's the reason Major League Hacking was because hackathon on the online and it's coming. So what do you think? Yeah, like what do you think? Like there is another you can say exponential growth in community culture. You can say community work. So yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why community is growing like that, and the idea of community is growing like that. Like 10 years ago, you would never see people who were like community managers, right? Like that job didn't really exist yet. Um, I think in the past year, right, part of the reason that community has grown is because people felt very isolated. A lot of us were stuck at home. You didn't necessarily get like the social environment that you would in a normal year. And so I think that communities kind of provided that outlet for people virtually, and that was incredibly important. I think in a normal year, there's a couple of reasons why communities are becoming so popular, right? One is that there is, especially in tech, a lot of opportunity to teach people new skills, and communities are a really good way of doing that. And so a lot of communities have popped up around learning and education, right, like MLH. I also think that people are realizing that one of the best ways to learn and be inspired and frankly like further your career is
True.
by finding other people who are just as excited about the things that you are, but have different perspectives. Like you could have 10 developers in a room, one of whom loves like animals, one of whom loves music, one of whom loves just like programming for the sake of programming, and all those different interests coming together results in some really cool like exciting outcomes, and community is a way of like facilitating that.
Yep. So, what do you think? Why community culture are very less in town areas specifically to compare when we are comparing to metropolitan cities?
I mean, the easy answer there is density of people, right? Like
Yep.
when you're in a city, the likelihood that you can find other people that share your interests is higher because there are more people, period. Like I grew up in a town near New York City, right? So probably 30, 40 minutes away. And there wasn't a tech community in my town. Like I maybe knew one other developer
Yeah.
my whole childhood. But in New York City, there was this like thriving tech community, and I could go
Yeah.
there and find things to do, but it didn't really exist where I lived. And you know, I think I'm not that much older than you, but when I was growing up, there really weren't websites to find community.
Hmm.
Like Meetup.com or even Facebook or
Yeah.
WhatsApp or whatever are these really
Yeah.
powerful tools for finding community. For me, it was like IRC, and that was awesome. Like I met a lot of really interesting people on these chat servers talking about technology, but they didn't live
Yeah.
anywhere near me, right? It wasn't as localized. Um, but I think that like if you live in a less dense area, there's actually an opportunity for you to build community. Like if you go to a city, that community probably already exists. It's probably existed for a long time. In a
Yeah.
town, you can be the one to start that up. Like I've seen people, you know, in like the rural area near New York, right? Like a couple hours away from the city, starting these tech communities, and people have to travel from further away. Maybe they're less frequent
Hmm.
meetups, but the people exist, and it's serving a need that um, wasn't being served before they started hosting those events, and I think that's really important.
Yep. So, what do you think? As you know, there are some famous MNC communities built up, like developer student clubs,
Yep.
Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador, and GitHub Student Expert. Like many programs is going on. But what do you think if like a guy or yeah, or any folk who want to get started with the community, want to lead a community in his local region, but people are people also are less interactive in that end, but also they are preferring for Google or Microsoft communities. So what do you think of what like as if you are if you want to leading start, if you are in the very young time and you want to start leading or creating your own community, so how you can tackle that thing? Because many people are just going for the namesake, even though the community is not working on that end. I'm not shout out to any particular community, but suppose if it's like Google, Microsoft, or the region in which you are living, the communities are not working as well, but you want to, but people are going on the name tag, you can say. So what your how you can, what are your tips your end to get started with this?
I mean, I think all of those programs are often very beneficial. And we kind of have designed like the MLH coaches program very similarly, but
Yep.
the idea is that you can kind of like use this brand and use the resources of the company to your advantage to get people interested in a community, right? And that can be really powerful because maybe people haven't heard of like whatever, like developer student club, like Nyack, New York, where I grew up, but maybe they've
Yeah.
heard of, Google, right? And that attracts
Yeah.
them to go to that first event. So I do think that can be important from like a brand perspective. But when you're starting out, I actually think one of the problems that people run into is they overthink it. They put
Yep.
too much planning into it. And what that results in is disappointment because you come up with these
Hmm.
like grand plans that you think are going to inspire all of these people. And realistically, they're not going to inspire that many people when you're starting out. It's something that builds over time. And so you basically have to just like take a leap of faith and do something and see how people react. And maybe your first meetup or event has like 2 other people at it. You know, that's not a failure, right? Because you found 2 other people that can help you grow it. But I think a lot of people get discouraged because in the early days of community, it's usually very small. It's usually not very like big and exciting, but it, you know, builds these kind of like foundational social connections that allow a community to grow.
Yep. So, like, suppose if there is a maybe like any folk who is in college in suppose second year, and his town and his college doesn't give the, you can say, at that community college that he's hearing from his friend, like those who are in the metropolitan city, suppose. So if he got a spirit like, yeah, I want to create a community in my area in order to you can say to get give the knowledge to the person, or for those who think that development is very hard for it, or like or hackathon, you can say hackathon community perspective. So what do you think if the lead has no audience, the people are going for the other thing relative to the, you can say, the community, because all the people are going there. So what do you think as a lead, how there is no audience here with you, no team has you, so how you can impact it around the people you?
I mean, at some point you have to build the audience from scratch, right? And often what that looks like for, you know, universities is literally like going to different classrooms, asking the professor if you can speak to the class, putting up flyers around campus, emailing different like email lists within the university. Like it's very, in some ways, like very old fashioned. You know, like just creating a Facebook event or like a meetup group or whatever doesn't get people to go. You have to go tell them about it. And you know, I usually suggest like go to the place where those people are already, you know, like hanging out, right? And maybe that's a classroom, maybe that's a workspace, you know, like maybe it's a co-working space, maybe it's an office of a company. But you have to go and basically make your pitch, and maybe a couple of people will be interested. But it's really about finding like some initial like early adopters, right, who can kind of get excited about it, and those people will become your evangelists. You know, like that's the interesting thing about community is that it kind of takes on a life of its own after a certain point, where the leader is not actually that important, right? And it's actually about all of the people in the community and what they want to do and how they do that, because it's not like a dictatorship, right? Like the leader is really just the first community member, and everyone else can contribute too. You know, like with MLA, like I mean, I've never met many of the community leaders in our, you know, like network, right? And they're doing amazing things, probably many of which I could have never thought of, you know, and Swift could have never thought of.
Yeah. So contributing side, I got one question. If maximum people are those people who just want to take the resources rather than contributing to community, so have you have you think like what motivate, like how motivation tips you can give to those persons, like you are doing you are taking resources, you can contribute to as well, but why you didn't doing, like is there any perspective on your side, like is it necessary to motivate them to, you can contribute, you are doing so much good, like you are doing great in open source, in the, you can say, in others field also. So have you any thought regarding that? Can we as a leader motivate them to contribute to communities?
So there's this idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? An intrinsic motivation is something that like you care about, and the fact that you care about it is what motivates you. An extrinsic motivation is something you get rewarded for, like, you know, a salary for a job, or, you know, free food at a meetup. I think that in the early days of community, you have to provide some kind of incentive or motivation to get people to take a chance on you, because, you know, even for the most extroverted people, it can be a little bit scary, like showing up to a group where you don't know anyone, and providing something like free food or swag or, you know, an interesting speaker or activity can be that hook to get people in the door. And that's an extrinsic motivation, right? Like they don't necessarily care about it for themselves. Over time, as they get more invested in it, as they have really positive experiences, as they feel comfortable, as they take more of a leadership role themselves, the motivation kind of like transitions and becomes something that they just like intrinsically care about. And that is way more powerful, right? Because Then, when there's no more free food to give away, people still show up. And so I think that it's a mix, right? Like you really do need a hook to get people in the door. Like for hackathons, we see that, you know, a massive group of people go to their first hackathon because a friend invited them, right? So there's like almost like a level of like peer pressure involved where your friends are bringing you to this event because they're excited about it and you don't care yet. But once you go, you start caring.
Okay, so my question is related to most on community side. What is the future of community in terms of jobs like community management, developer advocacy, and many more? What are your aspect on that?
That's a complicated question. There are a couple of different ways that companies think about community. One way is that the community has I would say like a meaningful stake in what they are building, and that they involve the community members in the process, right? And that is a very successful strategy because it basically creates like a feedback loop that allows you to grow your product in a very organic way based on what the community is telling you. The other way that companies look at community is as a marketing channel, right? And you have to think about like what the purpose of the product is. You know, if it's something like a developer tool or a piece of software for, you know, organizing or whatever, it may make sense for the community to be really involved. But like, what if you're building, I don't know, like enterprise, like expense management software? They're not really a community at that point, right? Like they're your users, maybe your customers, but a lot of companies call them community because it creates like, it creates more of a perception of kind of like mutual benefit, and it also creates a just like a more positive feeling among the customer base. But I don't think those things are the same, right? Like I think a company who meaningfully involves their community in the product versus a company that is looking at their community simply as a marketing audience are very different animals. And so when I think you know, you're talking about careers and developer relations or community management, there's kind of like a lot of different paths to go down there, right? Like some community managers are purely marketing focused. Some community managers don't have any marketing goals, right? It's actually about engagement or, you know, perception of the product or things like that. The same is true of developer evangelists. Like if you look at 10 different companies, it is fairly likely that all 10 have a different job description and different goals for their developer evangelists. Sometimes they're engineers, sometimes they're marketing, sometimes they're customer support, sometimes they're sales. Like it's all over the place. And you know, I think the positive part of that is that community-minded developers have a lot of options, and they can kind of choose whatever path they're most excited about.
Okay, so my next question is, does DevRel kind of a job, DevRel specifically, or you can say in DevRel, developer advocacy and many things, can pay you because like many people thought that in monetization and communities work on like an NGO kind of thing and kind of that stuff, but background is coming with other thing, like also we get monetized on that and maybe in sponsorship and other things. But what do you think? Because have a in people's mind there is a concept that as if you are doing computer engineering or computer science, then your final job is SD role in any company. And what do you think? Like if we are comparing, firstly we're comparing for the monetization, and can community management roles or specifically DevRel kind of roles, can you pay you more as compared to SD role? Because many people are going on that end.
I don't know if they pay more. I think in some cases they are comparable, but I would guess that most software engineers make more money than most developer evangelists on average. I don't necessarily think that's the right way for companies to treat that, right? Because most developer evangelists could go get a job as an engineer, so there's an opportunity cost involved. But I think that there are a lot of benefits to having a career in community that go beyond the salary compensation. And I don't mean to say that people should undervalue themselves or take less money to do more work, but I think that like for me, just talking from personal experience, being a developer evangelist at Twilio gave me a platform to do a lot of really interesting things, make a lot of really important professional connections, and in some ways, like build my profile as a individual on the internet who is involved in this space. And as a software engineer, you don't get to do that as much. And so it really depends like what you want to do, right? Like I know people who are incredible software engineers, way better than me, where that's their career, they're leveling up, they're becoming engineering managers, and they love it. You know, for me, I was really looking for something that involved working with people very directly, and that was the thing that like inspired me. And if I had been sitting, you know, writing code for 8 hours a day every day, it would have been fine. But like, I got more enjoyment out of working with people at least part of the time, right? And having that mix of technology and people was, like, I mean, the ideal career that I was looking for. And I think for a lot of developer evangelists, it's similar, right? Like, I'm looking at you here, like, you're a developer, but you're hosting this show on YouTube, and obviously, like, that's not coding, but it's still valuable from like a technical community perspective.
So like what you think like when you Swift just give you like a kind of, it's kind of maybe a personal kind of thing, so where you met, like I think so he's a lawyer and he's just joined in the community, so how you both joined and started the one of the biggest, you can say one of the biggest community around the world, so can you share on that end too?
Yeah, so we actually met many years before we started MLH. And the first time we met, we didn't really talk at all. So I was in college and I was doing contracting work as a developer evangelist for EchoNest, which was a music tech startup. And they sent me to this hackathon at Rutgers University in New Jersey, where Swift was a student. And so I was there as a sponsor. He was there as a participant. We probably said 5 words to each other and didn't talk the entire time. So technically, that's where we first met. Where we started to become friends and collaborators was when we both graduated from college, and I was working as a developer evangelist at Twilio. He was working as a developer evangelist at SendGrid. We were both in New York, and our companies had very parallel developer marketing and developer evangelism strategies that caused us to sponsor many of the same events. So Swift and I were frequently like traveling together, speaking at the same events, organizing events together, and you know, that's really what led us to become friends. And kind of as we became, you know, closer friends, we started talking more about like interesting projects we could work on, startups we could work on, like all sorts of crazy ideas. And you know, MLH was not our first idea, right? We brainstormed tons of ideas. We still have like a Google Doc that's like 10 years old with like a list of ideas in it. And, you know, it's funny because all we knew was that we wanted to work on something together, right? Like we had found founders before we found an idea. And, you know, Swift had been so inspired by going to hackathons, and I had been so inspired by going to hackathons that it had a really like personal impact for us. But like, you know, what caused MLH to actually be created was Swift and I both agreed to quit our jobs to start a startup. My boss convinced me to stay another 6 months, and Swift quit his job immediately. And so he was like, oh no, I have nothing to do now for 6 months. And he was doing some freelance work. And a mutual friend of ours suggested that he try to get all of these student hackathon organizers of like these like 5 or 10 different universities to collaborate together, right? And like have this network. And that was it, right? And Swift was just like flying around to these events, talking to the organizers, trying to do some cool stuff. And it was fairly small. And you know, once I started helping him with it, as I was like getting ready to quit my job, we started thinking about like what it could become and how we could, you know, pay our rent and like all of those kinds of things. And you know, I don't think that either of us imagined that MLH would be what it is today. I think we're both like, like I don't know, we're proud of what it's become, but it was hard to foresee at that time because it was such a niche thing.
Okay, so I'm just talking on the future and what your future aspiration for the Major League Hacking specifically. Like you've done in coaches program is also going on, hackathon is also going on, fellowship is also going on. Recently, new production track is going on. So what your aspect, like I think so you covered a lot more in the educational aspect. So like what is the future of Major League Hacking as a co-founder?
Yeah. The way that we've started to think about MLH is as a means for people to get hands-on educational experience. One of the things that we've realized over the years is that even in the best computer science programs in the world, you don't get a lot of practical experience, right?
Yeah.
You get a lot of theory, and you probably learn some coding, maybe like Python, maybe Java, whatever, maybe C if you're really like old-fashioned. And
Yeah.
what you actually need to build software is practice, right? And practice building real stuff. And as we've evolved MLH, that's how we've started to think about it, as a way for people to get that practice, get that experience, and start their careers. And so, the fellowship fits really nicely into that because it's a 12-week like hands-on training program. But I think hackathons and local hack day also fit into that mold because they are ways for people to find collaborators and build cool technology and gain experience. And I think that's the future of MLH, right? Is like more ways for people to level up and gain experience and learn skills and get their start, in a career.
Yep. So that's a great part. And what do you think, as part of a community, you are leading you are a founder of one community? Can community as a leader can impact turn into a startup? Like because you also turn into 30 and 30 Forbes and on the you can say specifically on the educational sector. So can you think edutech that is trendiest nowadays in the edutech startup is going because all the things go on online and many people thought of maybe edutech or maybe related to community stuff can be incorporated in that startup. So what do you think, can a community can become a future startup?
I don't think it's quite that simple. I think that the way it is incredibly rare and unlikely that a community becomes a startup, right? Like if I were to talk about like, my hacker meetup in New York City, that's not going to become a startup, right? Maybe people will meet their co-founders and build a startup because of that group, but the group itself is not going to be a startup. The way that communities become startups is typically with some kind of product offering that the community is really excited about, right? So, I mean, here's a totally non-technical example, right? Have you heard of StockX or like any of these websites where people buy and sell like shoes and stuff?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That community existed way before the product did. People were going on like forums or Facebook groups or chat groups and buying and selling like shoes because that's what they were excited about. Like that community existed before the apps did. And someone was able to create a tool that made people's lives easier in that community. And that's a startup, right? Like that's a real thing. But it's not the community that's the startup. It's the tool that allows the community to be successful. And in many ways, MLH is the same thing, right? Like we are if you think of MLH as a product, our product is training and resources and the network and the support that we provide and the educational curriculum and like all of those things that allow the community to be successful. But without those things, it wouldn't be a startup, right? It would just be a community. So that's my differentiation there, right? Like startups are about product, not about community. And I think community can be integral to the startup's success, which it is in MLH's case, but the community is not the product.
There is a question from the live chat, like, is there value in spending a couple of years as a hardcore SDE before transition to a more community-based role?
I actually, yeah, I think so. And the reason I say that is actually from personal experience. So I have had some software engineering jobs, but really I went into developer evangelism immediately upon graduating from college.
Yeah.
And Swift continued working as a software engineer for longer than I did.
Yeah.
And he is incredibly, like, he is much better engineer than I am. Like, way better. Like, he understands a lot of the best practices and unit testing and like
Yeah.
architecture so much better than I do. I think because he had that additional experience, and it didn't like hinder me in what I wanted to do as a developer evangelist. And you know, I don't think it really has a negative impact on what I do at MLH. But I think it is much easier to get someone to mentor you and teach you all of those things at the beginning of your career than it is when you're further along. And so I do think there's value in being a developer before being a developer evangelist. And you know, I think that the best developer evangelists I know have a really strong technical background.
Okay. So I think that's a statement by Shrikaran only. Like it feels like you would be closing some doors for yourself as far as long-term career in tech goes. It if your first job out of the college is a community-based role as opposed to a SDA role.
I don't think it's closing doors. I think there's like a really valid career path in community and in developer evangelism that doesn't require you to be a software engineer. I just think from personal experience, like as an intern or as a junior developer, you learn
Yeah.
a ton of things that are harder to learn down the road, and it's just an opportunity cost thing. So I don't know.
There's a like you can say a personal kind of question maybe, John, because like when you're starting your community with Swift,
Yeah.
what you can say hard step you or you can say tremblers that came into your to building the community specifically, because in initial we know, like as I already asked on that, and like many communities have existed, so how Major League Hacking changes even though your other programs like fellowship coaches program is not there at the starting. So what do you think how MLH grow is due to the, you can say the COVID happened, or it's before like you're doing already or something, but it's just a kind of marketized thing because everything is goes online. So your hackathons seems to be like a very easy for maybe everyone. So yeah, what's your thought on that?
So I think there's a couple of questions there, right? Like in terms of COVID and how it impacted things, um, in many ways, you know, everything moving virtual led to some really interesting like innovations. Um,
Yeah,
I think that historically, most online hackathons took place over a fairly long period of time, you know, like weeks or months, and they were more like these like competitions. Um,
yeah,
I think that moving all of our events virtual led to a lot of like forced innovation in terms of how do you run a weekend long hackathon online and keep people engaged. And I think that's really
yeah,
cool. And I don't think that's going away. I think that like even when in-person events, you know, return, there's going to be virtual events too. And I think they serve a different need, right? Like one of my favorite things about virtual hackathons is the global participation. You know, it's
yeah,
not uncommon to have people at the same hackathon from like 10 different countries. And that never
yeah,
happened before in person, right? Because it was logistically
yeah,
impossible. Um, so I think that's really cool. And you know, I think inevitably we'll probably have both in the future, right? Like in person and virtual, because they fulfill
yeah,
different, you know, like in person, there's a lot of serendipity. You know, like you can
yeah,
walk around a room and have a cool conversation with someone you've never met. Online, that's
yeah,
less common. But online is much more accessible. You know, like
yeah,
let's say you have, I don't know, a kid and you need to take care of them. You can't go to a hackathon for a weekend, but you can sit at your
yeah,
computer at home for a weekend,
yeah,
right? And I think that that's really important.
yeah,
I think the other part of the question that you were asking is kind of like how does MLH grow and how do we think about growth?
yeah,
Uh, so MLH is like there are multiple layers to the community, right? Like there's
yeah.
the community of organizers who are awesome
Hmm.
people like you who rally their local hackers to, you know, do cool things. And then there's the hackers themselves. And I think that, you know, we always try to create things that provide a lot of value to both organizers and hackers, because
Yep.
we all exist in this same like ecosystem, and if organizers are successful, there will be more hackers and the whole community will grow, and that's what's important at the end of the day. And so we really think about it as like this like layered thing where it's like we have to give value at every layer of the process so that people
Yep.
stay engaged and get excited about it and have really positive experiences.
Yep. So we are coming to the, you can say, the end of the podcast. What your tips for the, you can say, new leading community leaders who want to get started the community, specifically, as I'm saying, we are focusing on the town area specifically. So what your tips from your side, from your experience, so you do the steps, so you didn't get wrong on that end. Yeah.
I think the main piece of advice I would give is like, start small. Like find one other person or two other people who are interested in your community and just like do something with them. Go out to dinner, get coffee, get, drinks if that's your thing, and like talk about tech and publish somewhere that you guys are doing that. But that's it. That could be your first community event. Like don't overthink it because you'll invest a lot of time and not get a lot out of it. What ends up happening is those two or three people have a really great experience and start inviting their friends, and you get this network effect that kind of builds on itself. But like, start simple. Like all you need is one other person. All you need is a really basic idea around a shared interest, and that's it. That's the beginning of a community. And what happens there is up to the community itself. Like there's no master plan. It always evolves organically.
Yep. So I missed one question. Actually, this is one with the last question, you can say. So like many people, if you are building a team, so there are some people like they want to contribute to the community, but they just wanna like if they get some monetize on that, and because like some people are maybe in the third year or final year of that college, but they also preparing for the some, you can say, placement scenario also, but they also wanted to contribute to community. So how you can say as a community leader, how you can like on the monetize, and how like you can monetize that people, or you can motivate it, no, you do this, if we become a, you can say, a community become a great, so we can also get a sponsorship, so we can find out on that end. So what you think on, you can say, the startup, or you can say the founder of that end, like if you are a startup, if you are having your own startup, so how you make money out of it basically?
So most communities operate not for profit, right? Like if you're a meetup group or something, it's unlikely that someone is making a living off of that. I think sponsorships are really interesting. And we could probably have an entire other podcast talking about sponsorship. When you have a small community, it's about finding someone who works at a company with an aligned interest. Maybe that interest is recruiting for their engineering team. Maybe that interest is marketing a developer platform. Maybe that interest is having a community exist in their local area so that their engineers have more fun being at that company, right? Like there's all these like little things. And the way that I approach it is like, I actually don't really approach it as a business transaction when you're starting out. Like if you have 5 person or 10 people in your community, find someone who works at a company, have, meet up with them and like just talk. Right? And talk about what you're trying to accomplish and talk about what they're trying to accomplish and see if you can find anything there that's mutually beneficial that you think will add value to the community. And that's where I start, right? And like, you could be talking like someone buying your community dinner. It's not a big amount of money here, but it's enough to enable you to do something that you couldn't have done on your own.
Yeah, sure. So we are in the final part of it. So I hope folks you got some insight to how to create a community, and I can bet on that because I am also specifically in the town area, and I created my own community through the motivation of the, you can say, how MLS works on that. And I think so. Like there's one more question. Is it? I think so, Aman. If it is for me, and you can all the links in the description. You can check it out. I'm having the MLS Discord server. I think so also, and our own Discord server also. So you can check that out for that. And at the last but not the least, do join the MLS in it. I having on my guild again, developer student community. Again, let's see what happened in this, because it's a new program, I think so, maybe because local hack days learn is maybe in the previous end, so there is no new transformation out of it. So yeah, do join MLH in it, and yeah, see ya folks. Hope so you you love this podcast. See you soon in the next podcast or next video session, you can say, in our community.
Thanks.